Good evening. My name is Chris Arnold, and on behalf of the Bob and Alicia Woodrick Diversity Learning Center at Grand Rapids Community College, we're pleased to have you here for our 16th annual Diversity Lecture Series. And it is an honor to have Ms. Lisa Shannon with us here this evening. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a few individuals. Dr. Stephen Ender, the president of Grand Rapids Community College, and his wife, Ms. Karen Ender. And we're really pleased to have some of our board of trustees with us here tonight. Ms. Margot Anderson, who is our board chair. Ms. Jan Magini. And Dr. Richard Reiskamp. Our board of trustees work very hard for our college and community, and we thank them for their support of our diversity initiatives here at GRCC. And I'd also like to acknowledge our generous sponsors of the lecture series, and we could not do this lecture series without their support. Our champion sponsor is Steelcase. Diversity advocates include Warner, Norcross, and Judd. Diversity partners, Amway, Davenport University, Michigan Radio, SMG Management, DeVos Place, Spectrum Health, the Nokomis Foundation, and Varnum Law. There's also a list of our diversity supporters in your program. And again, we're very grateful for all our many friends and supporters. And for those of you who are interested in supporting any of the programs through the Diversity Learning Center, we welcome those opportunities through our GRCC Foundation. I'd like to also thank the diversity team for their continuing support and commitment, and special thank you to our Diversity Learning Center staff, Jennifer Smith, Tamber Moore, and Kathleen Owens, and all the volunteers here tonight. And special thank you to Fountain Street Church. This is just an amazing facility, and we certainly appreciate their support and support of the college and our many programs. And their staff here, Heather, Melissa, and Travis, thank you for all your support and hosting us here. And really want to thank someone from our media department as well. Class Quant, thank you for your help in videotaping the lectures, and we're really glad that we're able to air these on our college channel so that those who aren't able to be with us are able to learn as well. For those of you who parked in the parking ramp, parking passes will be provided at a discounted rate, and you can get those at the information table. And please take a moment to fill out your evaluation. Your input is really important to us, and we welcome your suggestions on future speakers and how we can continue to improve this program. This is our 16th year, and we're really proud of our history of offering diverse voices to help engage our community in not only local viewpoints, but global viewpoints. It's especially appropriate that Lisa Shannon is here with us tonight. March is Women's History Month, and we often think of our country's history focusing on the right to vote and the struggle of women's movements. It is sobering to realize the true conditions of women around the world. Earlier, we learned the hard truths about the conditions of women along our border with Mexico through Barbara Martinez's lecture. And tonight we will be introduced to, or reminded of, how often women do not enjoy even basic human rights and become the casualties of powers and struggles of war. We are concluding our lecture series this evening and hope that the series has been not only educational for us all, but also a call to action, giving our time and passion either locally or to a global issue. We see social justice and shared power as a way to create safety and support for all of us, and we want our circle of concern to be very wide. I'm proud to represent the college in the center as it works to promote the understanding of multicultural and social equity concerns as a centerpiece of GRCC, and it is the core mission of the Diversity Learning Center. Listening to each other to promote respect and offer perspectives that contribute to the health and well-being of our community is very important. And now I am pleased to introduce one of our sponsors, a good friend to GRCC, and someone I admire for her advocacy work, Ms. Debb Bailey, Director of Corporate Relations at Steelcase, who will introduce our speaker tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Lisa Shannon had what one would consider a good life, a successful company, security, and a fiancé. But one day, while watching Oprah, she was awakened by the atrocities of the Congo women, women gang raped and demoralized, millions dead from the worst war since World War II. She decided at that single moment to become an activist and a sister. She founded Run for the Congo, which began with her lone 30-mile run in Portland, and which has now blossomed into the first national grassroots movement for Congolese women. Her book on her experiences, 1,000 Sisters, My Journey into the Worst Place on Earth to be a Woman, was released in 2010. At Run for the Congo, Lisa has sponsored more than 1,000 Congolese women through Women to Women International, where she is an ambassador. The money goes to help them obtain an education. In 2007 and 2008, Lisa visited with women in the Eastern Congo and returned again in 2010. She appeared with Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Rwandan on an episode of Oprah, which was dedicated to the greatest moral imperative of our time, the empowerment of women worldwide. Her appearance was ranked as one of Oprah's most inspiring moments of 2008. She has also been selected as the first greatest woman of the day by Huffington Post as part of its month-long celebration of Women's History Month. Tonight, we're going to hear about how not only a single moment changed her life, but how it changed the lives of others. With grace and integrity, Lisa will share her transformation from a lapsed idealist to the leader of a mass movement for Congolese women. Please welcome Lisa Shannon.
Wow. Well, what an honor to be here. It was fun hanging out in that green room, seeing some of the folks who have come through these walls in previous years, Amelia Earhart, Eleanor Roosevelt. Exciting. Yeah, I've had the best day here, just spending time with the folks at Grand Rapids Community College. We just had a lovely dinner, and I actually had lunch with a woman locally who is organizing the first Grand Rapids Run for Congo Women. So I hope everyone here will keep in mind, as we talk more about Congo this evening, that there are going to be some very concrete ways that members of this community can plug in. Is Lisa here? Lisa Boyd? She here? Could you stand up for just 1 second? So this will be the woman to talk to at the end of the... Yeah, it's such an honor to be part of this series in particular, and we talked a little bit about this at dinner, the role that this lecture series plays in really shifting and going after some of the core root causes of situations like Congo. But to back up a little bit, you know, I was someone as I grew up who always believed that I would be someone who would do something to change the world, as I think a lot of us do as kids. But like many of us, somewhere between 15 and 25, I grew up. You know, I got real. I got a life. And I learned to mind my own business. Quite literally, actually, in my case, I owned a stock photography production company, meaning my job was to hire pretty perfect models and take them out to pretty perfect beaches or green grass and try to capture basically the perfect image of happiness. Very weird way to make a living. But approaching my 30th birthday, my father had passed away about 4 months before my 30th birthday, and on a couple weeks before my 30th birthday, I found myself on the couch with strep throat watching an episode of Oprah. And that is where I learned about the situation in Congo. Prior to that, I could not have picked Congo out on a map. I certainly had no idea that there was a war happening there. But what I learned that day in that 20-minute segment did change my life. It's the deadliest war since World War II. About 5.4 million people, they say, have died in the conflict. Almost half of those children under the age of 5. 45,000 people a month, 1,500 a day. It's also widely termed the worst place on earth to be a woman. And that is because the sexual violence in Congo is off the charts. Gang rape is the standard, most common form of rape in Congo. Torture, women are held for months or even years as sexual slaves. Militias inflict injuries following rape that are systematically designed to destroy women's ability to reproduce. So systematic, in fact, that doctors say they can often tell which militia and in which location a woman was attacked because women are effectively being branded with these injuries. Up until about 2 months ago, I would have told you that the best estimates are that perhaps hundreds of thousands of women have been raped in Congo. And a couple months ago, I met some health researchers who were about to publish a report in the American Journal of Public Health based on Government of Congo statistics that would say, in fact, despite the fact that the rape crisis in Congo has been termed a pandemic and the worst sexual violence on the planet based on certain numbers, in fact, the rates of rape are 23 times higher than that. Women are raped in Congo 4 every 5 minutes, more than 1,100 a day, and the rape totals are more than 3 million. So that is what we mean when we say that it's the worst place on earth to be a woman. One of the things that was most shocking to me when I first learned about this is the connection to the Rwandan Genocide. I don't know how many of you may have seen Hotel Rwanda or had some sense of what happened in Rwanda in 1994. There was a genocide where about 800,000 Tutsis were killed in 4 months' time. At the conclusion of that genocide, the genocidaires, as they're called, the people responsible for the genocide, were pushed over the border into Congo, along with between 1 million to 2 million Hutu refugees. And these genocidaires took over refugee camps in Congo. So the international community and aid groups had to make a decision. Were they going to support these militias running the camps in order to treat those people, or just cut them off? This young man is someone that I met on my most recent trip to Congo. He's 17 years old, and he was a baby at the time of the genocide. His father was a genocidaire, and he was pushed over the border with those refugees. And ultimately, as all of that community did, end up in Congo's forests. They retreated into Congo's forests where they set up shop and started terrorizing locals. They rebranded themselves the FDLR, or Interahamwe, those who kill together. And so this young man was raised inside those militia camps. His father was killed. His mother may have been killed, may have run away. We don't know. But at the time I met him, he had only just escaped a couple months before and was trying to make it back to Rwanda, even though he had been raised in this militia. So as much as people like to look at the Rwandan genocide and say that Tutsis taking over the Rwandan government was where that story kind of ended, in fact, for Congo, that's where it began. Other militias were formed to fight the FDLR and then each other, and it erupted into what's been termed Africa's World War. Now, it's tempting to frame this sort of thing as sad, but kind of not our problem. The United Nations, however, has accused all nations involved of using the war as a cover for looting, because Congo is also considered one of the wealthiest countries on the planet in terms of resources. So tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold are found in 100% of our consumer electronics products. Those mines are controlled by militias and fuel the conflict, and so quite inadvertently, we are all helping fund that conflict every time we buy a new consumer electronics product, and we're all carrying around a little chunk of Congo in our pocket. But for me, I think the thing that struck me more than anything was just the human toll and the human face of the conflict. There was one woman whose story was told in the first person in Oprah magazine, the companion piece to that show. She was talking about being dragged away to the forest by a militia, and she was begging for her life. It looked like they were going to rape or kill her. And basically a militia said to her, well, even if we killed you, what would it matter? You are not human. You are like an animal. Even if we killed you, you would not be missed. What struck me about that is not so much that a member of a militia would say something like that to a woman, but that in many ways the international community agrees with that guy. When 5.4 million people die and no one's even talking about it, we are sending a powerful message that we consider these people less than human, that it is not our problem and we can't be bothered. And so for me, it was just a life moment, because I think I had always thought of myself as the kind of person, when I learned about the Holocaust, when I learned about the genocide in Rwanda, I swore if that ever happened and I knew about it, I would be someone who would do something. So it became a moment that was about who I perceived myself to be as a human being. And I thought, okay, I don't really know what to do, but I have to find some simple way of sending the opposite message, that these people matter to me. And what I could think of at the time was signing up to sponsor women through Women for Women International, who appeared on that Oprah program. Women for Women International has a comprehensive education program. You sponsor an individual woman to go through a year's worth of training in literacy, women's rights, women's role rebuilding society after war, and you exchange letters with her. This is a Women for Women, this photo is of a Women for Women training center. The women inside are learning how to sew, and the women outside have been waiting all day in the rain, hoping to become enrolled. So from there, I decided, okay, I can sign up to sponsor 2 women. So I did, but then as I thought about it, it just stayed on my mind, and I felt like I wanted to do more. So I decided I was going to try to rally my friends, see if I could get my friends together to do, I don't know, a dinner or a walk, something. But none of my friends had heard about Congo. So they really weren't interested. And it was then that I realized I was going to have to do something extreme enough to get their attention. Because in fact, it wasn't just that they hadn't heard of it, it was almost like there was this sense of suspicion. Like, okay, deadliest war since World War II and no one's talking about it? Surely there must be a reason. And it's Lisa who just kind of doesn't get it, right? But I didn't think so. So I decided I would train to do a 30-mile trail run in Portland with the goal of raising 30 sponsorships for women in Congo. Now, there was one sort of like serious problem with that, which is that I'm a very wimpy runner. Oh, that's another sister. In fact, seriously unqualified on every level. I had tried to train to run a marathon many years before, and on my first 14-mile training run, actually stopped and called a cab to drive me back to the car. 10 miles in, and that was the end of my marathon ambitions. I mean, I'm very slow. I've had grandmas and their fat dogs walk right past me on the trail. So there was that. I'd never done any fundraising, never done any public speaking, never tried to mobilize people around an issue before, so it was brand new to me. So I started training, and I trained in secret for 4 months because, frankly, I was afraid I couldn't do it. I didn't know if I'd get injured or if I would flake. So I trained in secret for 4 months, every week going on the longest run of my life. And then finally decided I was ready to start talking with people about it. And much to my surprise, as I started talking with people, they were actually very receptive. And by the time I did my first 30-mile trail run, and this is me after my second 30-mile trail run, looking glamorous, we had not raised 30 sponsorships or $10,000, but in fact 80 sponsorships, about $28,000 that first year. So, for me, I felt like that was an interesting indicator. I felt emboldened. I thought, okay, well, Obviously, when people hear about what's happening in Congo, they care, and they want to do something. I also hopped online and started looking around. I thought, okay, there's a movement for Darfur. I'm going to get online and figure out who else around the country is working on this issue so we can come together and start working together. Spent a lot of hours on the internet looking around. The field was blank. Deadliest war since World War II, and there's no movement in this country to stop it 8 years in. Worst sexual violence on the planet. I found a small group out of DC called Friends of the Congo, and a woman in California collecting combs and tea bags to send to fistula victims in Congo. That was it. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, at the same time I started hearing from these other women around the country who heard about what I had done, and maybe they wanted to do their own run. And I thought, well, let's see if we can get some traction with this. Let's launch it, you know. So my mom and I took out key permits in a few cities around the country and decided on this new goal. I thought, well, if I said 10,000 and we raised 28,000, then surely the next logical goal should be $1 million, right? I ran the numbers, and it seemed pretty straightforward. I just needed a handful of people to step up and do the same thing. But to me, I felt like $1 million would signify a movement. And that's what Congo needed, a movement for Congo like there has been for Darfur. Cut to the first New York Run for Congo Women. We had taken out a permit there, and my mom and I get out of the car, 6 a.m., Riverside Park, and we step out into gale force winds. We have our run in a suitcase. And we had been warned, the Park Service had actually called us the night before and asked if we planned to cancel because there's this huge storm, right? And my response was, no, we're not going to cancel. When it rains in Congo, women have to hide in the forest, you know, without even a plastic sheet to keep them dry. Their kids get sick and die. Yeah, we're running anyway. But by our 8 a.m. start time, I knew no one was going to come. We had about 40 or 50 registrations. One person showed up, and we ran. Other runs went a little better. 10 people here, 50 people there, 100 people in Portland. We had runs in 10 states and 4 countries for a grand fundraising total of $60,000. So it was, you know, it's something, but it was not the movement I was hoping for. And I put a lot of thought into what is it going to take for Congo to get traction? One of the biggest obstacles I found in that first period was that no one had heard about Congo. So how do you mobilize people who have no point of reference? In fact, at the time, news coverage of Congo was so spare that any time a major newspaper would run a story about Congo, it would be forwarded to me by like 20 friends because it was like an event if the New York Times ran a story about Congo. In fact, at the time, I even had a conversation with a journalist who had worked at the Associated Press in London. And I was sort of asking him about coverage. He told me it was, in fact, a conscious decision on the part of the Associated Press to not cover the Congo. That Congo was synonymous with African conflict we won't cover. Obviously, I was curious why that might be. And he said, because it's widely understood that Americans do not have room in their psyches for more than one international conflict, and that's Iraq. I disagreed. Because I'm out talking with people about Congo all the time, and I found when I talk with people, they care and they want to do something. So I felt like, okay, well, if you won't do it, then I will. If what's lacking is information, if what's lacking is story, then I will get on a plane. I hatched a new, very straightforward plan. I'm going to get on a plane, go to Congo, collect stories, do it with a camera, make a documentary that will help us raise the $1 million, and then that will be a movement. Again, kind of major snag. I'd never been to Africa before. Certainly had never been to a war zone. So I was coming at it completely cold, but I decided to just dive right in. A lot of people ask me when they know I've been to Congo, what was it like? Did you feel threatened? Was it safe? That's still a really hard question for me to answer because the truth is it was disorienting. I don't know even now if I could point to the exact moments that were most dangerous or the ones that weren't. I mean, I know, for instance, on my first day there, I had gotten back to my hotel, which was supposed to be pretty secure. And, you know, there's just this sort of paranoia in the air. You're very much on edge. I'm fumbling for my keys in the dark, and I look up, and there's a man standing there with a 4-foot axe. I thought, I really hope this guy works for the hotel, which it turned out he did. He was security. Another time I was in a car and I had been asking about the Mai Mai militia, which is known as a local Congolese defense force, but they're known for all of the atrocities that any militia is known for. They have abducted and held hostage many Westerners. They're known for mass rape, certainly killing people. So I'm riding in this car and asking about them because it's really hard to tell the difference between the Mai Mai and the Congolese army. So we're in this car riding along, and I'm asking my friend, and there's this other guy sitting next to me. I ask about the Mai Mai, and she says, well, if you want to know about the Mai Mai, why don't you ask the guy who's sitting next to you? He's the president of that militia for all of South Kivu. So that was awkward. Although what I did actually at the time was I remembered this tip that somebody had given me. If you ever run into trouble in Congo, just treat everybody like your very best friend. So I tried to just keep it really positive and upbeat and ask a lot of leading questions. And I guess it kind of worked because a few months later, he actually called me in the US requesting a job reference for his application with an international humanitarian organization. So Congo's that sort of place, lots of surprises. But I think for me, the biggest surprise in Congo was meeting the women. In every women's group, I was greeted with this just unbelievable singing and dancing, these huge celebrations. One of the first words I learned in Swahili was faraha, which means joy, or I am so happy, because I heard it over and over and over again. But mostly I talked with Congolese women, and certainly they had experienced everything one would expect that they had. Almost all of the women had lived through violent attacks on their homes. Everyone had had family members die in the war. Almost all of the women had had children die, and often not just one child, 2 children, 3 children, 4 children. One woman, in her paperwork, it said that she had had 7 children die. But when I met her, it actually turned out they had just run out of space, and she had had 10 children die. More often than not, that's people hiding in the forest with their kids. The kids get sick, you know, they can't access medical care, so the kids die. Certainly in terms of rape, it was always very tricky talking about it. What would it take to sort of set the tone early so people felt open and that they could talk about their experiences? But I did visit villages where half of the women had been raped. I visited one village where 90% of the women had been raped. But obviously, I saw a lot of women for women success stories as well, because we know certain things about investing in women worldwide. We know that when you give women money, that they reinvest it in the community, and that's certainly what I saw, true to all of the studies, that women were spending the money to send their kids to school, on health care, women investing in businesses, a lot of women actually buying plots of land every month with their sponsorship funds and amassing enough land that they could then hire employees to farm the land so that they could stay home and be safe. Also, an enormous number of the women we sponsored had taken in orphans as well, so that was interesting. But I think for me, one of the biggest surprises going in was that I had always assumed that the money was the important part, right? In the face of what these women have lived through, the question of writing someone a letter can be so awkward. I mean, you always feel like, what could I possibly say to someone who's lived through that kind of torture that would mean anything to them at all? And yet, when you get there, you know, often I was surrounded on Women for Women compounds by these crowds of women pulling out letters from their sponsors, you know, and I found myself having to, like, explain, what is yoga? or what is a dormer, or what is Disneyland? And what I found is that in a lot of ways it really didn't matter what the sponsor said. The point was, as Kathleen actually talked about earlier today, is that they feel seen, that they feel known, and that someone had taken the time to reach out to them. Women were carrying around those letters like their most prized possessions, in packets hung around their necks, tucked right next to their hearts, or wrapped up with the last remaining photos of loved ones who had been murdered. What I heard in every women's group over and over again was, I feel like a human being again. I feel like a woman again. When I got on a plane to leave, I realized here I was with these hundreds of stories and faced with this very difficult decision about what to do with them, because I felt like I had entered a kind of unspoken contract with Congolese women. It was very emotional for a lot of women to tell me their story, to relive that, but even more so, for a lot of Congolese women, it was actually very risky for them to talk to me. They were actually risking their lives to tell their story, and so I felt a lot of responsibility, and yet, at the same time, I have to balance that against this question of what stories actually motivate people here to do something, and what stories make us shut down, what's too much. I mean, for me, that's one of the most central questions when you deal with a place like Congo, this question of taste versus truth. It's really one of the trickiest endeavors. There's an author who wrote a book about the Rwandan Genocide, Philip Gorovich, a book called We Wish to Inform You Tomorrow We Will Be Killed with Our Families. He was talking about this recently, about how in our culture, when we talk about the kind of violence that is happening in Congo, we tend to hurl around buzzwords like unthinkable, unspeakable, unimaginable. And what we're doing when we use words like that is effectively posturing like we're dealing with something when in fact we haven't dealt with it at all. His point was, as journalists, and I think certainly by extension activists, what's our job if not to think and speak? And yet in Congo, what you have to deal with right away is this sense that you're dealing with horror stories that would not be included even in like a Nightmare on Elm Street film, right? There's one story in particular that embodies this. This is my very dear friend, Generose. I told her story twice when I came back from that first trip, and I didn't tell it again for a year and a half. The last time I told it was when I was talking to the Holocaust Memorial Museum and saw a committee on conscience staff covered their ears. Now I tell the story all the time, so I would like to share it with you, although I will warn you that it's graphic. Generose was at home when the FDLR, that Hutu militia linked to the Rwandan genocide, showed up at her house, and they wanted money. So she and her husband pulled together everything they had, which was about $120. He was a school principal, she was a nurse, so they were considered kind of middle class, and 120 bucks in Congo is a lot of money. So they hand it over to the militia, but the militia wants more. So they start beating her husband, trying to get him to give more money. Generose cries out. And to be clear, it's widely understood in Eastern Congo, if the FDLR is at your house, no one is coming to help you. You scream to give your neighbors a chance to get away. As punishment, they immediately shot and killed her husband, and then they told her to put her leg up on a chair. They took machetes and they cut off her leg above the knee. There were 6 children present, so they took the leg and they cut it into 6 pieces, and they threw it in the fire. And then they commanded that her children eat their mother's leg. When her 9-year-old son refused, he was shot in the head. She actually had injuries when she woke up in the hospital a few days later that indicate she was gang raped after she passed out from blood loss. So Generosa's story is particularly difficult, not just because it is straight horror, but how do I tell that story in a way that doesn't reinforce old world stereotypes about Africa, right? It's a story about forced cannibalism. And yet it's the truth. So I have to deal with that a lot, especially when one talks with people about a place like Congo. There's this tendency to sort of careen towards dismissing the violence as tribal or savage, or sometimes people say it's cultural over there. And I think that's very tricky. I think it's extremely tricky to confuse what is a culture of impunity, which means there's no punishment for crimes, so chaos reigns and violence spreads, versus rape in Congo is somehow cultural or inherent to the landscape, which I always feel like careens towards sort of this sense that maybe it feels different to have your children die in the forest, or to be gang raped, or have your husband killed in front of you if you live in a place that the rest of the world calls the heart of darkness. That in some ways this violence is expected, and that women in Congo should just expect to live through this kind of thing. And I have found when you look closely at it, more often than not, when we careen towards these sort of stereotypical framing of the issue, that what we're really doing is looking for a way to let ourselves off the hook. I have grown to feel that the biggest threat to human security, certainly to women in Congo, is not so much the militias as our well-trained capacity to simply flip off our empathy switch. And that is what has to change. So that's what I was dealing with when I was thinking about how do I share these stories, and ultimately I decided to write a book rather than make a film. In thinking about what would motivate people, you know, there are a lot of people much more qualified to write a book about Congo than me, certainly policy analysts, historians, journalists. I'd never written a book before, another first. But I felt like one thing that I had was no obligation to remain neutral, that I could relate to Congolese women like friends and like family and just present the conflict through that lens. I had to think a lot about what stories would motivate people, and also what makes people engage or shut down. One of the key questions I had to deal with was whether or not to include myself in the book. And if I did include myself in the book, how did I want to come off? Did I want to come off like a leader, like a hero? Because the truth is, I had never been to Congo before, I'd never been to Africa, and I screwed up a lot. I mean, I categorically have stumbled my way through every piece of this process. In fact, as I was talking about a little earlier tonight, when I sat down to write the book, I actually wrote a list of all the things I did not want to include. And I included about 90% of them. The exception was anything that would be a direct security threat to people on the ground in Congo. Because I've grown to feel that one of the main reasons people don't engage in these issues isn't fear that they won't make a difference, but fear that they'll stumble or screw it up in public, right? So I thought if I can just be transparent about all the ways that I've stumbled, then hopefully that will make it a little more approachable for people, you know, who are thinking about getting involved. And of course, lucky for me, I had recorded all of it on video. And so I had about 70 hours of me screwing up, well documented. And I'll tell you, it was tempting. There are some scenes where I behaved inappropriately and pushed too hard and wasn't sensitive, and it was very tempting to go back and just edit them a little bit, just take out a few rounds of asking pushy questions. But I didn't, because I felt like it was too important. One of the biggest things that I had to face when I came back from that first trip was the questions I had asked. Because when I went there, when we certainly talked for hours. But I realized that we had talked for hours about what Congolese women called the trouble I got from war. But almost never did I ask anything about who they were outside of the conflict. I certainly did not ask about who their family members were that had been killed. I mean, even in Generosa's case, I didn't know the names of her husband and her son, and I had grown closer to her than just about anybody else there. So I had to sit with that and realize I needed to go back and I needed to ask different questions. So I did go back, and just as one example, I asked Generos, what do you miss most about your husband, whose name was Claude, and her son's name was Lucien? And really without hesitating, she said, when I was pregnant and my belly was really heavy with a baby, he would wash my body. It was very intimate. I recently saw a documentary called Worse Than War that reviews the history of genocide and mass atrocity since World War II. The filmmaker made a really simple point. If you want to stop genocide and mass atrocity, you have to do two things. You have to change the cost-benefit for the perpetrators, because the truth is, genocide and mass atrocity pays. It's a calculated decision. Someone has weighed the cost, the potential cost, and the benefits, and decided they'll get more out of it than it costs them. So we have to change that. But the second thing that you have to do, which he pointed out, is get people here to relate to it as though it's happening to our own families. A light bulb went on when I heard that. I thought, God, well, what have we been doing through Run for Congo Women all these years, if not cultivating those emotional bonds and trying to get people here to just make an emotional connection and treat a Congolese woman like she's family. I mean, through Women for Women, we call the women we sponsor our sisters, which I think is tempting to kind of blow off as being kind of touchy-feely or new agey, maybe a little cheesy, but I've actually grown to think of it as a fundamental tool for social change. Because I just wonder if there isn't something about human beings that is fundamentally uncomfortable with relating to other human beings strictly through the lens of horror. And yet, if we can connect with them like they're our own family, our set point for what we're willing to hear changes radically. It's a way of basically flipping on the empathy switch and keeping it on. It has been my experience that American women and men, once they have that kind of emotional connection, are more than willing to think and imagine and act. So I sort of developed a theory that perhaps we could leverage those emotional bonds to change the cost-benefit. And just shortly after I saw that and was kind of chewing on this idea, I found myself on Capitol Hill in DC last May talking about it. Conflict minerals, the minerals that end up in all of our cell phones and consumer electronics, were actually being targeted in a bill. So for the very first time, there was conflict minerals legislation, really the first piece of legislation that was aimed at going after one of the key drivers of the conflict. So, you know, I wanted to lend my support. I went to speak about it. I talked about how we have these tens of thousands of American women who are highly invested in seeing an end to the violence. At the same time, I learned that there was actually, behind closed doors, tremendous industry pushback against the bill. That groups like Intel, Hewlett-Packard, an industry group called ITIC, representing 50 tech companies, were actively working and lobbying to gut the bill. I was leaked a document with their proposed changes outlined, where they repeatedly referred to the bill as burdensome to industry. At the same time, I also learned from 3 separate sources that the cost to industry would be less than 1 penny per finished electronics product. To me, that was like nails on chalkboard. All these years I had been talking about the way through our silence we communicate with Congolese people that we do not consider them human. This was the first time I had ever heard of anyone actively lobbying for that statement. Your lives are not worth a penny. I had honestly never heard of such a thing. I mean, even slave owners in 1860 valued human life at more than a penny. So, you know, not really done any lobbying before, but I just felt like I cannot listen to that garbage. I have to say something. So my mom and I decided that we were going to go out to the bank, and we got a hold of 45,000 pennies, representing 45,000 lives lost in Congo every month. So sort of the first month's worth of lives. And Intel has big operations in Portland, so we took the 45,000 pennies over to Intel with a very simple message. We'll pay the extra penny. Her life is worth it. Oop. There we are at Intel, 45,000 pennies next to a sign at the end of the day. They wouldn't come out. They wouldn't hear our statement. So that night, I wandered over to the vegan mini mall in Portland and ended up talking with some people there, and they were like, well, you know what you could do? It might be annoying, but you could try. Just post a few messages on their Facebook page. So before you know it, a few hours later, we hop on the Intel Facebook page, and we're like, hey, conflict minerals, this and that. You know, you have maybe 10, 12 people just posting a few messages, and Intel takes them down. We're like, we post them again, and they take them down again. So we post them again. And they take them down again. So we start tweeting, how come Intel's taking down our posts? Why won't they let people talk about conflict minerals? Then, in a remarkable turn, Intel freezes their Facebook page so that no one can post anything until they can get it under control. This is just like classic violation of social media etiquette. You don't do that. So before you know it, it instantly makes it an international story. So we got all kinds of fun-loving press titles like Intel freaks out, protesters get up in Intel's Facebook, or my favorite, translated from the Swedish, Intel does a poodle on Facebook. But we decided basically, well, why stop there? So we decided to go to, my mom and I hop in the car with the 45,000 pennies and go to Intel. I call this one Mom Does the Norma Ray. Your supply chain, your responsibility. That's us in front of Intel headquarters. Us and this woman named Diane from Facebook, a sponsor. Whoop. Uh-oh, there we go. The 45,000 pennies. And so we continued. We went to Intel headquarters, Apple headquarters, and Hewlett-Packard headquarters. And then we went back to the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference, which my mom is very proud of herself for sneaking behind the Fox News reporter with her sign. She's like that. And I want to be clear about something. I have absolutely no love of corporate campaigning. I find it negative. It's not something I had ever done before. And up until this point, I had done something that no one is going to question. I was just raising money for women in Congo. That all changes when you start to question huge corporations. It's amazing who peels off. You know, it was negative. I was way out of my comfort zone. I do not like confrontation. This day, let's see what the next slide is here. Oh, we'll back up. This day, there were thousands of tech guys lined up around that block, and I borrowed my mom's sign. She made it, so I was going to use it. I walked around just asking, would anybody here like a little more information about conflict minerals and tech products? Everyone was very uncomfortable and sort of shifty and didn't really want to hear it. One guy actually asked me to put my sign down because the word rape made him uncomfortable. That day I realized that it was the first time in 5 years that I was actually talking with people about Congo who didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be there, you know. My voice would shake, I was very uncomfortable. And yet what I kept going back to are all the Congolese women that I talked to. The way that they were risking their lives to tell me their story. There was one woman I talked to on my most recent trip whose son had been murdered by the Congolese army. And a few weeks later, she was spotted talking to a journalist, I guess, and they came after her. She had to hide for weeks, sleep away from her house. When I talked to her, she said, hey, look, you know, we have no laws here, we have no rights. They can kill your family, and if you complain to anyone, then they come after you. And what struck me in that moment is she was still talking to me, despite the risk. So how could I back down, right? I couldn't. Ultimately, our story ended up making it onto National Public Radio's Morning Edition in the New York Times. And as the bill progressed, it was not just tech. The manufacturing, retail, and jewelry lobbies all came out against the bill. These are some of the biggest lobbies that we have in this country. And basically, all we had was a really simple message for our representatives. We can't stop you. And I want to note that this was a totally bipartisan effort. The bill was introduced by Sam Brownback, a very conservative guy from Kansas, so both parties were behind it. We contacted our representatives and said, look, we can't stop you from gutting it. We cannot stop you from voting against it, but if you do, we will shout from the rooftops, you do not value African lives at more than a penny. We won. The bill passed with full teeth. I recently watched a video from our very first visit to Apple headquarters. The video itself has technically been destroyed because apparently I violated about 5 laws. There we are with pennies asking to talk to Steve Jobs. The receptionist was actually very cool and calm about the whole thing, even though it was pretty theatrical. It was so interesting. I watched this video, and this woman comes chasing us out of the building and basically says, Apple products do not have conflict minerals in them. And again, it was almost like this kind of tidal wave of passion. You know, my voice was shaking as I talked to her. I was clearly really uncomfortable. But I just said, hey, look, you know, first of all, for you to deny it is out of step with the rest of industry who at least acknowledge that there's an issue. So we would have to begin a conversation by being honest. But secondly, you know, we're here to let you know you have an opportunity to get in front of this issue. Take it on. We want you to take this straight to Steve Jobs. You know, this is an opportunity because the tech industry up until now has taken for granted that there is no movement for Congo in this country, and those days are over. We're here, it's not going away, it's gonna be a big story, right? It's gonna be huge, and it's like me and my mom, and this woman named Diane, we're tag teaming it with the Enough Project. Here's the amazing thing. I was totally faking it. I had no idea how that was gonna happen. Within 6 weeks of that visit, everything I threatened had come to pass. It was in the New York Times. Steve Jobs personally spoke out about conflict minerals for the first time. Apple changed their position 3 times in a month and committed to start working towards a solution for the problem. And the legislation passed. Yeah, it was kind of a big deal. A few months ago, in the fall, I was very honored to be selected as one of Oprah Magazine's Power List. And I got invited to this event in New York for Power Listers, which was amusing, looking at the invitation saying it was for some of the world's most powerful women in, you know, science, politics, the arts, whatever. And I had this brilliant moment where I get in the car heading to the event with this guy named Rick O'Barry. I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary The Cove. It won the Oscar last year for Best Documentary. And then this MacArthur genius is in the car, and the first thing Rick O'Barry says is, I don't know how I got on this list. Do you feel powerful? I don't feel powerful. If I was powerful, I could, you know, actually stop this thing from happening that I'm trying to work on. And the other woman's like, yeah, I don't feel powerful. Do you feel powerful? And even like Vera Wang was there at the event. She gets up on the stage, and the first thing she says is like, I don't know how I got here. So I've been thinking about this issue of power and the idea that it can never be things like profile or press or your platform, because we don't have control over those things. The tremendous irony of it is the moments that we are staking out our power are often the moments that we feel most powerless. That we are way out of our comfort zone, often very intimidated, totally in new terrain. You're exposed out of your element. You may even feel silly. I know I did. I certainly felt silly in this moment. More often than not, you have someone standing over your shoulder telling you to get back in line or defer to someone who knows better. It's not fun. But the truth is that most people will never cross that threshold because it's so uncomfortable. All we can do in those moments is show up and just hold the ground. you cannot know the reverberations that will come out of that act. You know, it's a funny thing, back to that first New York run with the one runner. One woman who didn't show up that day is a woman who was married to a firefighter. Their basement flooded that morning, and she couldn't make it. But she became the New York Run for Congo Women organizer the next year, and they had 100 people. And the next year they had 300 people, and the next year they had 500 people. And around the world, oh, that's us at the Worldwide Developers Conference. We just got a bigger sign because we didn't have more people. This is my mom and I at that first New York run. Now we've had about 6,000 people participate in Run for Congo Women events around the country. Up until about a month and a half ago, I would tell you that we had sponsored about 1,500 Congolese women and raised about $750,000, which you will note is not $1 million, but it is a movement. Because now there's yoga for Congo women and empowering Congo women, healing for Congo women. V-Day has taken it on, the Raise Hope for Congo campaign, and now we're launching the 1,000 Sisters campaign. It still has bothered me an awful lot that technically Run for Congo Women had not raised $1 million, but then in the fall, in 2009, I got a phone call from the Oprah Winfrey Show. And within a couple weeks, I found myself on the Oprah Winfrey Show with Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times, Hillary Clinton, and Ben Affleck. And we raised $6 million in about a week. We doubled the size of Women for Women's Congo program by 5,500 participants a year additionally enrolled. And now, actually, because it's been more than a year, it's rolled over into new sponsorships. So I'm proud to say, as of a month ago, we officially crossed our fundraising, official fundraising total of $1 million. We're at $1,045,000. So that's good. But if you consider the media bump, in addition, we've raised closer to $12 million, supported about 13,000 Congolese women who are raising on average about 5 children each, meaning the total number of Congolese women and children directly benefiting from Run for Congo Women efforts is more than 75,000. So that went well. But what I always think back to is, how could I have known that morning in New York? I mean, to say that I somehow trusted it would make a difference that we ran that day wouldn't be a total overstatement. I hoped it would. When I was in Congo, the first time, I was talking with a group of women where half of the women had been raped. And at the end of a long conversation, I asked if they had any questions for us. And one woman raised her hand and she asked, are women also raped in America? And I said, well, yeah, women are raped everywhere on the planet. It's not as common as it is here. But you should know that there are some women who were raped in America who actually ran to raise your sponsorship. It was quiet for a bit. Another woman raises her hand and says, how can I manage and improve so I become a woman who can help other women? That stuck with me, and it gave me an idea. I thought, what if we were to do a Run for Congo Women in the Congo, right? Give Congolese women the opportunity to run for other Congolese women. So I'm proud to say we just had our first ever Run for Congo Women in the Congo a year ago. We had solidarity gatherings around the world and asked everybody to do a 1-mile run. I was not sure how Congolese women were going to react to this idea. I was concerned it would feel contrived. Because, I mean, Congolese women do not exactly run for exercise. And I certainly heard a lot of, like, this is a very unique idea that you brought to us. But the truth is, I explained, you're not going to get anything out of it than the good feeling of helping other women. No one hesitated. In fact, they were so excited, one group of women got up at midnight to go out and wait for the 6 a.m. bus because they wanted to make sure that they were not going to miss their ride. It was probably the best day of my life. Generose came that day. Not only did Generose show up, as you see here, this is a woman who has lived through torture that is designed to destroy the human spirit. And yet that day, she not only shows up, but she shows up in a red suit and pink pearls, right? And the run was actually really hard for her. I don't know if you can see in the photo. She's on mismatched crutches. One hits here and one's under her arms. It was very awkward. Her shoes started to slip, so we both kicked off our shoes and ran barefoot together. But it was physically a struggle, and she was able to go about a third of a mile, and she had to stop. There was one journalist there at the time who said she wasn't sure if she could cover Generose's participation in the run because she didn't finish the 1 mile. But you know what? Generose showed up, and she took it as far as she possibly could. And I asked her why she would do that, and she said, because if I can run on only one leg, then everyone will know that they can do something to help. I've grown to feel that all any of us really need to do is follow Generose's lead. We just need to show up. Show up without knowing the perfect thing to say, stumble our way through it, show up without credentials or endorsements or anyone to say go, show up even with ego and grandiosity, but show up and trust that the reverberations of that will be far bigger than anything that we can measure in our lifetime. So with that, I'm just going to show you a few pictures. This is the very first photo I received of Generose. They give you these little postage stamp size photos of women when they're first enrolled. That was the first photo taken of her. That's her today. Francine today. Marie-Jean today. Annie Marie and baby Lisa. Faraha today. Zaverine, my very first Congolese sister, today. Oops, Noella. Antonia. Thank you. So we have plenty of time for some question and answer. If you guys would like to chat a little bit more about Congo policy, maybe you've read the book and have questions, anything. Wide open.
I'll be first.
Okay.
I'm taking your advice to just step up.
Yes.
As an educator, my question to you is, what is being done to sort of change the trajectory of the path of the young boys' lives? Because obviously the leadership they have is to grow up and perpetuate the violence.
Yep. There was nothing that I heard more stridently from Congolese women or young men who had been abducted and then released as child soldiers than education. They wanted to go to school. Moms want their kids to go to school. It's the most important thing to them. And I can tell you, just as an example of the kind of reverb and leadership as it grows around Congo, the North Carolina Run for Congo Women organizer has actually just launched a program where students here can sponsor kids there to go to school. So it's $52 for a year, and the kids can exchange letters with the kids that they're sponsoring. I sponsor one, even though I don't have kids. I'm borrowing people's kids to write the letters. But it's been great because the kids are very directly war affected, definitely traumatized. It's not heavily weighted towards girls. It's boys and girls who are included in the program. And it's great. It's Kids for Congo Kids with a 4 as the number, kidsforcongokids.org. And it's a great little program that's brand new, and it's a great way to get kids involved in a way that's kind of low-key, because it's hard to know how you talk with children here about the issues, but it does help them to participate. it sure has been fun watching moms here try to explain it to their kids. We have the Chicago Run organizer has been doing it for years and has overheard her daughter tell her friends that her mom helps the children of Costco. So they all process it differently, but anyway. But it's cool. Kids like to see that. So there's some concrete things that we can do. But bigger picture, demobilization efforts, the U.S. government has to do more to pay for demobilization, get the guns out of the hands of the violent kids, right? Thank you all so much for coming. Great to meet you. And again, if any of you would like to get involved, talk to Lisa Boyd right there, who's assembling the Grand Rapids team. Oh, yeah. One more question. Oh, okay. What NGO do you work for?
It's the International Foundation for Education and Self Help.
Oh, great. Okay.
And one of our programs there was to integrate those child soldiers back into society in the Congo.
Oh, in Congo. Oh, fantastic. Oh, great.
We had a program that trainer of educators in Africa, 13 countries. There's room for hundreds of organizations such as yours, such as mine.
Yeah.
Get behind something.
Yeah.
Whether it's hers or something else, get behind one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, demobilization is key. I've been railing about it recently on Facebook, that the U.S. government, for instance, funded $17 million for rape treatment in Congo, while the UN program to demobilize soldiers is underfunded by $8 million that would result in the demobilization of 8,000 soldiers. So my question for the U.S. government is, like, an ounce of prevention, who's weighing this out? What is the most effective use of those funds? Because, you know, if we can prevent the rapes, better, right? For less money, why wouldn't we do that? So we're really encouraging the U.S. government to take a more coordinated look at what the kind of money we're sending over there to highest and best use, right? Thank you all so much, and I'll be around to sign books and chat more out there. Thank you so much for coming.